I am so delighted to have Edward J. Epstein here tonight at Politics and Prose and for us to be able to host him. He's written a fascinating and important new book, adding to an already very long and impressive list of titles to his name. This one is called How America Lost Its Secrets, Edward Snowden, the Man and the Theft. Now, if you think you already know the story of Edward Snowden, chances are you probably actually don't. You will know much more if you read his book. It's quite eye-opening, and it's a terrific read, by the way. It kind of reads like a mystery crime-solving thing, which is true of many of his works. And I have to say the timing is pretty darn good. We're on day 3 of a new administration here today. And in case we haven't had enough reasons to think about national security and global geopolitics and the America-Russia relationship, Ed Epstein's reporting adds to all 3 of those areas, addressing the unsolved mysteries surrounding Edward Snowden, and specifically what and how much classified information he stole and with whom he might have been working. I think we all know and we can sense that investigative reporting is by nature very, very difficult, perhaps never more so than it is right now. I just want to say that as somebody who has the benefit of hearing from lots of authors in this venue, I really do think it takes a lot of guts to challenge the prevailing wisdom on controversial subjects like Edward Snowden, to try to get beneath the surface debate of whether he's a hero or a traitor, and to be willing to puncture the mythology that has come to define his case, if that's what the reporting leads you to. And I would say that no one is better suited than Ed Epstein to take on a deeper investigation of the Snowden case. He has a very long track record of deep immersion into very thorny subjects. I think he's written 14 books or some huge number. Many of them attempt to untangle ways in which powerful individuals and institutions are connected by money and politics, commodities, and often by a shared aversion to the law. So he's had a lot of experience looking into these very difficult subjects. He also, by the way, has been a professor of political science at UCLA and MIT. For this book, How America Lost Its Secrets, he's traveled extensively overseas, including to, as he calls it, the crime scene. He interviewed many, many people connected to the case, scoured documents and records. And I just want to say some slide editorial comment. Most important, at least from my vantage point, at a time when fake news has become a political weapon of choice for some in our own government and certainly for some other governments, we can rest easy that Ed Epstein deals only in facts, not in alternative facts, but in actual facts. So we're very grateful to you for that. And please join me in welcoming Edward J. Epstein to Politics and Prose.
Thank you, Lisa, for that wonderful introduction and for this wonderful bookstore. I don't think we have anything like it in New York. The selection and the size and the events, I'm impressed. It's my first time here. For the past 5 decades, should be louder. I haven't started yet, so it's okay. For the past 5 decades, a single issue has concerned me. How unverified assertions become established in the public mind as conventional wisdom. It all began in 1965 with my first book, and I was still a student, an undergraduate even, my first book, Inquest, the Warren Commission and the Establishment of Truth. I somehow got access, met with the commissioners on the Warren Commission, the lawyers, their staff, and they gave me their internal records. No one else had seen any of this material. And as I say, I had not graduated yet. What I found was that the conventional wisdom that the Warren Commission had done an exhaustive investigation was not supported by their own records. I continued to pursue this issue with many investigations, resulting in my books, The Black Panthers, The Diamond Cartel, Watergate, the Nixon War on Drugs, Russian disinformation. I found many instances of press gullibility, but nothing prepared me for the uncritical acceptance of a narrative from a single self-interested source who happened to be living at an unknown residence somewhere under the protection of Putin's Kremlin. That person was, of course, Edward Snowden. Even though his story could not be verified in any possible way, even though he had lied to the journalists before he ever met them as to his position and identity, even though he provided them with no details, this story somehow became a prevailing narrative. Very strong. It became almost a religion to a small group of people. If we strip away this narrative and just look at the bare-bone facts, they can be summed up in a single sentence. An intelligence worker at the NSA stole secrets and went to Russia. Ordinarily, if this defector had gone straight to Russia, almost everyone would have accepted that he was, or this was, a potential espionage case. In fact, the NSA has had other defectors who have gone straight to Russia. William Martin and Vernon Mitchell, during the Cold War, they worked with civilian employees like Snowden, working at the NSA. They went to Russia. They held a press conference. Those days, Moscow didn't have very many television cameras, but they had every television camera they could. This was 1960, I should say. They televised to the world press this press conference where these men claimed to be whistleblowers, said that NSA surveillance could cause a nuclear war, and they had to act out of conscience. The only difference is no one believed them, okay? When we come to the case of Snowden, he didn't go straight to Russia. He made a pit stop, as we all know, in Hong Kong. He met there with two hand-picked journalists, actually three. He provided them with an alternative narrative, his own narrative. He also provided them with documents. The documents totally legitimate, and the documents exposed NSA domestic surveillance operations. This disclosure operation, or whatever we want to call it, in Hong Kong was enormously successful. It so overwhelmed the media, the public, even members of governments, that you had this innocent-looking face, because he made a video. Laura Poitras made a video of him, which later became the documentary you might have seen called Citizen 4. Excellent documentary. People suddenly accepted that this was a truth teller. Went to Moscow. His story was further honed there. And if you want to see the ultimate version, I recommend Oliver Stone's movie, Snowden. That is the Snowden narrative. In my investigation, I found all the key parts of this narrative were untrue. Snowden, everything he had said in his, I believe that he originally objected to the NSA. I believe he was a disgruntled employee. But after that, where he was heading, why he was heading someplace, why he wound up in Russia, his dealings with the Russian government, his dealings with secrets, I believe this is all part of his cover story. Let me give you 4 statements, each of which are either recorded or published. So it's not a question of quotes or anything like that. And this is what we call direct evidence. You might not believe it, but it's not circumstantial, it's not inferred, and it all cast some doubt or complete doubt on his story. First of all, we have our friend Vladimir Putin, who at a televised press conference in September 2013, just to put the chronology straight, Snowden went to Hong Kong in May 2013, Russia June 2013, and this is September 2013. Putin said Snowden had met with Russian diplomats in Hong Kong, and when he heard from the Russian diplomats whatever they had to say about Snowden, it was then that Putin said he personally authorized Snowden to be brought or come to Russia. Okay? So, you know, here we have the president of Russia saying that Putin was meeting with Russian officials, and we can imagine what Russian diplomats might be, in Hong Kong. Secondly, Snowden got a lawyer when he got to Moscow called Anatoly Kucherena. And this lawyer became his intermediary. 10 weeks after he got to Moscow, this lawyer went on a daytime television show called Sophie and Co., hosted by Sophie Shevardnadze. And she was asking him about these Snowden's secret documents. And he said, Kucherena answered and said, well, he gave only some of them to the journalist he met with in Hong Kong. So she, a little taken back by this, and she asked him, well, does he still have documents that have not been publicly disclosed here in Moscow? And Kucherena answered, certainly. Now, I was so amazed by that because at this point in September 2013, Snowden had not yet made a statement on where the documents and material were. He did later, and he later said that he had destroyed them all before he left for Moscow. So here was his lawyer saying he brought some of his material to Moscow. So I went to Moscow. I interviewed Kucherena, which wasn't easy. In fact, I'm the only American journalist to have interviewed him. The story is in my book. But in any case, I asked him specifically, because that was my whole purpose, if this was true, if he had been misquoted, if Russian, which he spoke, he had been misinterpreted. And he said, no, it was true. It is true. Okay, so that's statement 2. Statement 3 was made by a member or the deputy head of the Duma, Russian parliament, committee for overseeing the military and the intelligence services. His name is Franz Klintsevich. Franz Klintsevich. And Klintsevich said, of all places, NPR, he said, well, not of all places, but take that back. Anyhow, he said, he said, let's be frank, Snowden shared his information with us. That's what our intelligence services do, and that's what all intelligence services do. Okay, so those are 3, what I consider important Russian witnesses to the Russian connection. Then the 4th is even more interesting. It's in Washington. The House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which has oversight, as I'm sure you all know, over the NSA, the CIA, the DIA, and the other 14 members of the intelligence community. They, of course, have very high classifications, and they investigated this for 25 months. But their investigation was limited to the reports of the intelligence services. They weren't doing any independent investigation. The report was signed by all the members, including every Democrat and every Republican on the committee. My Democrat minority leader is Adam Schiff. They all thus signed a conclusion, and in the report, which was only declassified December 22nd of 2016, it says, Snowden, after he arrived in Moscow, met with Russian intelligence and continues to meet with them. So, if any one of these four statements, and I believe them all, by the way, but if any one of them is correct, then Snowden is not being truthful, and his narrative falls apart like a house of sand. Okay? If all four are correct, then he is what the Russians call, and I'm going to explain this a little further, an espionage source. I met with 6 former KGB officers in Moscow, including one, which has nothing to do with the Snowden case, although he did, had been the case officer for Lee Harvey Oswald. When Lee Harvey Oswald had gone to Mexico City, he was the KGB officer in this then called Soviet embassy. But in any case, they all said to me some interesting things. They said, look, in Le Carré, spies recruited, they're moles, they're advanced up the ladder. He said that happens sometimes, but that's not where we get our information. Anyone, no matter how pure their motives, no matter how little they knew that they were dealing with us, whether it was accident or purpose, whether they were paid money or they were just doing things for idealistic reasons, if it was accidental they delivered the information, we call them an espionage source. And I think that's a job description that fits Snowden. I believe that he did bring them secrets. It's not just documents. Documents are one part of espionage. They're an important part because they testify to the source's validity. Okay, they're willing to deliver documents. But what's in his head is also crucially important. One case described to me in Moscow, Ronald Pelton, another NSA civilian employee, after he left the NSA, had no documents. He opened a liquor business or something, went broke, needed money, and of all the stupid things in the world, walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington. Stupid because the FBI in those days, 1980, filming everyone that goes in. Maybe they still are. He met with KGB officer Victor Cherkeshin, who I was speaking to, a very interesting man. He was case officer for Aldrich Ames and Robert Hansen. But anyhow, he said, look, this guy came in and I had to make a decision. He had no papers, but he said he had things in his head. What do we do with them? They smuggled him out in a electric utility truck, dressed as a worker. They moved him to Vienna. They put him in the residence of the Soviet ambassador in Vienna. They flew in a team from Moscow. The names of the head of the team is in my book. I can't remember, Alexander something, from military intelligence called the GRU. They spent 15 days working with him from 9 in the morning to 6 at night. They gave him a lot of time to sleep. And what they extracted from him basically was a very important operation, now known as Ivy Bells, in which joint CIA-NSA operation to tap into underwater cables using submarines in the Sea of Akash in the Pacific, which was, of course, completely blown by this guy. So my only point to saying this is if they suspect someone has secrets in their head, just suspect it, they're going to go to great lengths to extract it. They're not going to say, oh, well, you have civil liberties if you don't want to cooperate, or do what you like, you know, you're a good guy, you're a nice-looking guy. That's not what they do. They get just as Clinton Civil, they get the information. Okay. Now, Snowden was a bit of a bragger. He said that he had access to information that could turn the lights out on the NSA, that could blow all their operations, the names of their agents, the names of their computers. These were public statements he made. These weren't private statements. The Russians, of course, read them, especially if they were in contact with him in Hong Kong. So it almost, to my mind, people don't like me to use words like inconceivable, but it's inconceivable to me, given what these 6 former KGB officers told me, that they didn't do what they had to do to get the information, whether Snowden was willing or unwilling. After all, he was in the palm of their hand in Moscow. Finally, I think this has to be looked at in a context of the continuing intelligence war between Russia and the United States. It's somewhat puzzling that so many journalists are willing to embrace the findings of U.S. intelligence that the Russians were behind the leaking and interfering with the elections and everything else, as if that was unquestionably true. And when it comes to the same findings of the same intelligence community, which are all in the House Select Committee's report, they then reject it out of hand, because one has to do with Russia and the other has to do with Snowden. They can't seem to make the connection that Snowden is in Russia, and he's not there by accident. I mean, Putin authorized exfiltrating him to Moscow. I just want to spend 1 second, then we're going to get to questions and answers further on the context. Ever since the NSA was created in 1952, it has been a prime object of Russian intelligence, for good reason. They dominate communications intelligence. First of all, through their computing power and their abilities and technical skills, and secondly, through their alliances with Britain, France, Israel, Germany, all the NATO allies who have cyber services, speak many languages. There's no way that they can equal the work that the NSA does, Russian intelligence or Chinese intelligence. And, you know, communications intelligence, as General Alexander said, the head of it is the queen on the chessboard. Because what you intercept in telephone conversations, off cables, off computers, off telemetry from rockets, supports all the other intelligence services. So think of the NSA as sort of the Uber, which goes out and delivers, picks up and delivers what the other intelligence services need. Okay, so basically this queen has to be taken off the chessboard, and the only way that can be managed is through espionage, basically learning the sources and methods that the NSA is using. Now, Snowden, just a few weeks before he flew to Hong Kong, changed jobs. And he gave the reason for changing jobs. He went from Dell, one outside contractor, to Booz Allen, another one, because Booz Allen had a contract that allowed it basically to move to what's the highest, next to highest level of NSA secrets, which included sources and methods. Where Snowden had been before, there weren't sources and methods. And Snowden told another interview in the South China Morning Post, Lana Lam, he told her, he said, the reason I changed and switched to Booz Allen, even though it meant a cut in salary, is I wanted to get access to the lists of computers around the world that the NSA is hacking into. So he went after what no one else had gone after. None of the other defectors to Moscow had ever gotten up to what's called level 3, sources and method. Snowden took this material, which the House committee says 1.5 million documents, gave 58,000 of them to the journalists in Hong Kong, and no one knows what's happened to the other 1,442,000. Okay? You would think this would be a major mystery. You would think that there would be questions, that journalists would be interested in finding out, that people would go, like I did, to Moscow and speak to Kucherina and speak to the people who have been handling Snowden. And yet, for some reason, if to the extent people are wedded to the narrative, as if like you're wedded to some religious doctrine, you don't want to question it. Why question it? Snowden will tweet or send his disciples out with messages. And if that is the truth, going any further is counterproductive. And I'm counterproductive. I went further, and that's what I consider my job. When Lissa had introduced me, she said quite accurately that I'm a contrarian. I like to poke holes in conventional wisdom. She couldn't have said it better. At this point, I think I'd like to hear what you have to say, and feel free, however this is done.
Yeah, if you could come up to the mic.
Thank you.
Don't be shy. I'm sure people here have questions about this. Yeah, sure.
Hi, thank you for that presentation. I haven't even looked at the Snowden content as of yet, for some, I don't know why. But I do want to be a bit of a contrarian myself and suggest that at least in some circles, the whole issue of secrecy, in Homeland Security and other parts of the government, they point to a changing paradigm, knowledge acquisition paradigm, which overarches this issue of secrecy. I'm sure you probably know where I'm going, but in doing that, there is this urgency that governments, and particularly the United States, feels of having accurate judgment, accurate measurement, and so forth. And I'm wondering, if you see any linkage between this, larger, broader, because of big data analytics and open data, whether that is, sort of skewing how we look at secrets and secrecy, and what is your prognosis on that?
Well, I agree with what you say. I even agree with what Snowden says when he says we live in a surveillance state. We do. Google, which is a giant surveillance machine, sells all our searches to one way or another to advertisers. Facebook sells the surveillance data. Its business model is surveillance too. It's not friendship. It doesn't earn money by how many friends we have. It has money to how it can create patterns for advertisers from our activities. Same thing with Twitter. Same thing with all the closed circuit TV cameras everywhere. And yes, the government too, and the government could access all this information through subpoenas, warrants, whatever. So this is a real change, as you say, the paradigm has changed. So the issue is, who has the right to declassify or steal or publish or give to enemies, because that's a possibility that in my own mind is very high, our secrets. Now, certainly, Congress, the president, commissions have that right. The programs that Snowden exposed, the two programs called the telephone program, which is called 215, and the prison program, which is called 702. Both those programs, of course, come under the undersight of the congressional committees, the House and Senate permanent committees. So, if those committees felt like declassifying it, or Dianne Feinstein wanted to, as she wants with the torture report, but if anyone, and I think Obama said this, and I'm just really agreeing with him, if the idea is that any person could decide to do whatever he liked with secrets. Yes, he's going to punch a hole in the surveillance state. Yes, he may help privacy, although I'm not so sure that's the case in Snowden, because he revealed so much information that might have a great, like records and things that might reveal other people's privacy concerns. So but yes, I can't tell you what the Bentham equation of good versus bad. I'm not really a judge. Whatever the courts decide on Snowden, I'm with them, okay? I'm not there to condemn Snowden. My interest is raising these questions about what happened to our secrets that we've spent maybe $1 trillion acquiring, our dominance in a field that's crucial, or maybe it isn't crucial in peacetime, but certainly crucial in contesting Russia and China. And just to stay with you for a moment, the present concern over hacking and cyber war, as long as we dominated communications intelligence, which was the case up to 2013, as long as we dominated it, countries like Russia and China would have to be very sly, because they realize that whatever they do, we probably know they're doing it. And I think the aggression we've seen in this cyber warfare comes from the loss of the NSA secrets. Now, maybe they've restored their dominance. I don't know that. But we'll have another question.
So, thank you very much for your talk and your book. I'm not well read on this subject. I did see the 2 movies, the documentary. Could you speculate a little bit about what was in Snowden's mind? So he was motivated patriotically because of domestic surveillance. Did he start out to want to be a secret agent? Did he get caught up in Putin's web? And so
Good question.
it would seem that he started out as he said he started out. He started out because he was angry. He thought he was smarter than the people above him. He didn't like what the NSA was doing. When he was in Hawaii, he held what's called, and I never heard the term before, crypto parties, which are a little like Tupperware parties, where you invite people who are against surveillance to look at technology which will basically defeat the NSA. Okay, it's called the Onion Router, TOR. And he invited people from the NSA, so he wasn't the only disgruntled person at the NSA, as far as I could tell. So I think he started, as far as I know, and for those reasons. Where he got caught up, my belief is in Hong Kong, because in Hong Kong he entered a place where there was no exit. The only exit was Russia. Mm-hmm. And the choice he had was going to prison in America, which he did not want to do, or get a platform, an international platform, which the Russians were going to give him, and live in Moscow. Mm-hmm. A very plush life. And he picked Moscow. Once he picked that, exactly, you have it.
thank you.
My turn? Just after Snowden got to Russia, I think it was on 60 Minutes, there were a number of NSA representatives who were talking about their situation, and they were emphasizing over and over again that they were only interested in telephone numbers, not the content of conversations. But the subtext of that program was, we don't know what he's got. And then shortly thereafter, the White House issued some sort of statement that there wasn't going to be any negotiations with him. Do you think that was a bad move, since NSA seemed to be saying they would at least entertain offers to get him back?
It's been a learning curve, okay? First thing we learned was when he released 2 or 3 documents in Hong Kong, the telephone program and the prison program, we learned he had these. When his 2 confederates, I won't call them confederates, but his 2 picked journalists, Laura Poitras and Glenn Greenwald, when they somehow screwed up their thumb drive, so Laura Poitras had to send a thumb drive. She was in Berlin to Glenn Greenwald, who was in Rio de Janeiro. It got intercepted by British intelligence, and then we learned 58,000 more documents. Meanwhile, even the program you saw on CBS, the deputy director, Rick Leggett, who was in charge of the damage assessment report, began to find major documents were missing. The way they found them is that the compartments which these documents were stored in have logs, like your computer has a log. And so when you selected a document, when you copied it, and when you moved it, it registered. That was the beginning. They still didn't know how many documents he had taken. Then they found out the most amazing thing, that when he changed jobs, he had what was called a thin computer. In fact, everyone at Booz Allen had a thin computer, which is a computer with no ports and no storage. It's basically a workstation. So he couldn't have downloaded the material he downloaded, at least into his workstation. So as they traced it, and the Department of Defense had a team of 250 people working for 15 months on this. It wasn't a minor investigation, around the clock, I should add. What they found is that he transferred it to the directory of a server at the NSA, and then he transferred it from there to a thick computer 20 miles away at another base where he had previously worked, where he had left his computer, which did have ports. And then he had to drive there, maybe every day, I don't quite know, and download onto thumb drives or external storage. So they were able to then, and he had wiped those things clean, but they were able to restore them. So then they were able to see how many documents he actually removed. And the number they came to was 1.5 million. The way I know, and my only source is the House Committee. Their only source is the Department of Defense and the NSA. And that's what we know. And we don't know where. We only know where those 58,000 documents are. We don't know where the other documents are.
Hello.
Oh, sorry.
Hi, Mr. Epstein. This is my first time being around you. I haven't read your book, but I've been following the Snowden case. I have seen the documentary by Poitras and Greenwald. A quick flashback: 4 years ago, at another bookstore, not Glenn Greenwald, but Jeremy Scahill had just brought out a book and a movie about his Middle East investigative journalism. I said, Mr. Scahill, you're a tremendous investigative journalist. So certainly your work in the Middle East has come across some 9/11 information that, you know, those of us in America discount what we've heard from the commission on 9/11, that there's some questions. We don't have answers, but there's some more questions. Oh, no, sir, I believe exactly what the commission said. And I was like blown away. Like, you call yourself an investigative journalist, Mr. Scahill, but certainly you have questions. No, I don't. Next question. And the owner of the bookstore stepped in and said, answer the man's question, Jeremy. There's more to his question than just discounting him because you don't believe what he's talking about.
Well, I'm not going to say next question.
Yeah. So,
Look,
don't you think that there's more to this, that we wouldn't have had a dialogue? Even President Obama came out and said, we must now talk about this NSA spying on our emails, on our phone calls. And you know, this is before Moscow and his taking away of his passport, that he opened up a whole dialogue. And he said, I'm now like a man without a country on that documentary, that I have no place to go. I don't know where I'm going to go. Julian Assange has been locked up for 4 years in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. You know, so what do you say to all this, that this man might have had some good things in the beginning and we don't know what's going on now?
Well, he opened up a conversation which is to the benefit of the public. You brought up Julian Assange, who helped Snowden get to Moscow. He created diversionary flights. He booked 15 decoy flights so people wouldn't know which plane he was flying on. He sent his personal deputy, maybe his girlfriend, Sarah Harrison, to Hong Kong to escort him there. And, you know, now Assange and WikiLeaks is identified by American intelligence. This is all after Russian hacking, maybe not fairly either. I'm just repeating, as a tool of Russian intelligence. The question is, I can't explain, and I don't try to explain, fill in the gaps that I don't know. And there are many gaps I don't know. There are 11 missing days in Hong Kong. He arrived in Hong Kong May 20th, and he checked into the hotel June 1st. I tried to find where he was. No one knew where he was. And believe me, I tried with military attachés and embassy officials. So, the fact that there are missing pieces should encourage people to be interested, to want to ask questions, to investigate. But the reaction I so often get is, if you don't have the answers, if you can't prove that he's a Russian spy, and I can't prove that, or he had been working for the Russians from the beginning, and I certainly can't prove that, I don't even believe that. But if you can't prove that, then your case falls apart. But I'm not presenting a case here. I'm presenting that there has been a false narrative. These are the reasons it's false. These are his connections with Russia, and I'm still trying to make sense out of it. I will add that American relations with Russia began to decline very severely with the Snowden case. When we found out he was going to Moscow, and we found out before he went, we sent the military attaché at the embassy to confirm with the Hong Kong government that they knew his passport had been suspended. They hoped to keep him in Hong Kong, but somehow he got onto a Russian plane, an Aeroflot plane, got to Moscow. We then asked Moscow to return him. And that began, there was a summit conference that Putin had really been looking forward to with Obama, a two-man conference in September, just before the Olympic Games. Obama, rightly in my opinion, canceled that summit. That made Putin begin to get angry at America. And in a sense, you then saw the Crimea, Ukraine, and everything that's followed, including the hacking scandal. So I'm not saying it traces back to Snowden, but I'm saying there was a change in our relations with Russia. Things changed, that's all I'm going to say.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Becky, and I just was recently listening to Spycast, or they have a podcast through the Spy Museum, and there was an NSA worker on there, and he had this theory that the FBI was about to arrest multiple moles in the NSA, and then the Edward Snowden case came about, and it kind of had this like smoke and mirrors effect where the FBI could not any longer focus on those other moles and had to focus on the Snowden thing. And I was wondering if you came across that theory in your investigation and what you think of it.
I just came across it now when you mentioned it.
Oh.
I love the theory. In intelligence, it's called an umbrella. If you have a real spy, you try to create maybe a minor spy as an umbrella. And it's always been in my mind that they actually have a spy in it where Snowden worked. Snowden didn't know it, but he maybe even encouraged Snowden to take as many documents as he did. Maybe Snowden said it's great leverage, you can negotiate with him. And maybe going public in the way he did in Hong Kong was, as you suggest, or as your NSA worker at the Spy Museum suggests, maybe it was part of a decoy. Of course, I haven't. I just find it an interesting theory. I know nothing to substantiate it.
Hi, I'm curious, what do you think the prospects are for sometime in the future bringing Snowden back to the United States and hopefully trying him and hopefully he's convicted and then executed?
Well, I think it would be a very good thing if he stood trial for two reasons. First of all, these missing parts of his life, he might fill them in. I've always wondered, here's a man who left with all this material. Doesn't he have records of his emails with the NSA, with his correspondence, something like that? So at a trial, it might be interesting. It might help us understand the case. I also think it would be in the interest of the ACLU to have Snowden stand trial, even if he was convicted, because they don't believe the laws, the espionage laws, are constitutional. And maybe they're not, okay? And that would give them a way of testing it. So Snowden would perform a public service by coming back. But he's not going to come back, because I don't think the Russians will release him, at least alive, okay? I think he knows too much. He's the man who knows too much now. I hope I'm wrong.
Okay, thank you.
Hi there. I guess looking at the two big principles of, not knowing what we don't know, and then I guess the second of what rumors that are inevitably flying around pretty much all year long, every year since this started. In your investigations, I mean, you talk about this 1.5 million documents that just seem to have been taken, but there's been no mention. Have there been even rumors, or have there been in all of your investigations, have you seen at least some evidence that maybe things have been leaked? Are any of them at all credible, or is it all just pretty much fanciful rumors?
So they know he removed 1.5 million documents. That's what the House committee says. Even if they're wrong, it means they have to consider every document is compromised and might be used for misinformation or disinformation. So they have to replace everything and every source, even whether or not they know that he actually was able to deliver them to Russia or not, okay? They also know he had a great deal in his head they don't know, and they have to figure out what did this guy know. But the question, of leaks, there have been stories that have interested me. Actually, I mention them in the book. When Russia invaded the Ukraine, the Wall Street Journal had a very authoritative report that we went dark, and this was 2014, it was shortly after, that the NSA, our satellites could see the Russians moving, but the NSA couldn't pick up what's normally you pick up with an army moving, cell phones and everything else. So there were you could say, well, the NSA might just really have screwed up, which is very possible, or that the Russians had other ways of cloaking their movements. There have been a few things like that, but the trouble with communications intelligence is if you find out that a telephone line is being listened to, let's say you're the mafia, let's make it simple, you don't close down that telephone line. You begin to use it to subtly tell the person who's listening what you want them to hear. So the real issue is not whether anything dramatic happened, but whether we were misled on a series of issues by information, or whether we closed down every single source we had. But yes, it still is a mystery how many of these documents have wound up in either Chinese hands or Russian hands, because Hong Kong, after all, is a self-governing region of China, and the Chinese control its national security and its intelligence work. So the fact he's walking around after he announces himself with many, not one, but many external hard drives, and God knows how many thumb drives, and how much he puts in the cloud. So China could have acquired it, Russia could have acquired it, and as China and Russia have a intelligence sharing treaty, they both could have it.
Thank you for coming. That was very interesting. My question is kind of both broad and simple, so I kind of apologize on that front. But if we kind of assume that every society kind of lies to itself to some degree, whether nobly or not, and that at some point even total transparency is problematic, at what point do you think the lies that we tell ourselves in democracy, like what's the critical threshold for you? Like when does that become politically unsalient, something like that?
Well, that's a very big and a very good question. You're right. We live by myths. We have myths of equality when we might not have equality. We have myths that democracy produces the best man for the job, which now we're all wondering about. We have myths that journalism is omniscient. And once they sort of cluster together and come out with an answer, as they did, let's say, before the Warren Commission, it was believed every newspaper, the New York Times published the Warren Commission, so did the Washington Post. They wrote the introductions. They believed this was the greatest investigation ever done. And then, when my book came out, I was the subject of rather vicious attacks, not as vicious as now, but vicious attacks. And then everyone came around to saying, yeah, they didn't do the greatest job. And by the way, I I think they probably came to the right conclusions, even though they didn't do the great job. But yes, the question of myths in society, and is Snowden a myth? Is the whole idea that we have more privacy now? I have very little privacy. You know, I mean, as does everyone in this room. I mean, if you consult Google Maps or Uber or something, at every moment you're giving away your privacy. So that's, and you know, sure, Snowden ended the telephone program, which was a stupid program. And it's good he did it. Because when it was put in 2001, not all of us, but many of us used telephones. By 2013, yeah, some people like me might use a landline, but all terrorists were using text over, Facebook or something like that. So, you know, and there was a great cost, by the way, I didn't mention, but the war on terrorism worked up until 2013 because the bomb makers in Pakistan and Iraq didn't understand that the NSA was capable of intercepting their messages before they reached Facebook or Microsoft Xbox or whatever. That we basically were intercepting the unencrypted part through fiber optic cables. And so they were sending messages like the mixture on bombs that were going to be used at the Grand Central Station. And of course that was shared with the FBI, and these people were arrested. After Snowden, suddenly they realized they needed end-to-end encryption. So they got more privacy now. With end-to-end encryptions, terrorists have a higher level of privacy, which accounts for many things. If we switch to end-to-end encryption, we'll also have higher privacy. But very few people do. I mean, you could turn off the global positioning on your phone. I mean, we all can. I think there's an option. I don't know where it is. But anyhow, I think it's a really good question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one last question. Go right ahead.
Well, I'm the only person in line, so no worries. All right, so
Good timing.
Thank you for your talk. So you mentioned Oliver Stone's film Snowden.
Yes.
I thought it was a decent film. Not all the critics agreed with me, but I wonder if you could comment on sort of what that film has done to add to the discussion over Edward Snowden and the things that he's done, and also how much that discussion is founded, since we all know Oliver Stone generally takes a good number of creative liberties with his work for dramatic purposes, shall we say?
Okay. Well, Oliver Stone, you know, I've debated him in town hall over JFK, which I like, by the way. I didn't like this Snowden film. Stone himself calls it fiction when he talks about it. But what it really is his own investigative reporting plus what's the Snowden narrative. He's added a few things to it. One of the most incredible things is Laura Poitras's film, Citizen 4, which won the Oscar. He's reenacted it with actors, okay, playing Bart Gelman and Laura Poitras, okay? He actually has added scenes, like he added a scene of Snowden destroying his hard drive and then showing it to Laura Poitras. Well, you don't think Laura Poitras would have included that scene in her film? You've seen them both. I hope that Oliver Stone would have added more. I think the film didn't really add to what we knew because he mixed fact and fiction to such an extent that it was very hard to say. The deputy director, who was Chris Inglis, did he ever know Snowden? I don't think so. So people got confused by it, but I have to credit Stone. He really tries. He doesn't just, he does immense research. You know, he paid, I mentioned this man Kucherina, he paid him $1 million for access to Snowden, and $1 million is a lot of money. Stone paid himself for the screenplay $600,000. Okay, so he doesn't mind spending money, and actually, I had a dinner with Stone, and he mentioned if you want to get to see Snowden, you should see Kucherina. So he sent me to Moscow, and I like him personally. So, but I don't think his film added anything to my understanding of the case. I think if you really want, what really added since I wrote my book is the declassification of the House report. It raised a lot of interesting little points that I didn't know. Just as I told you about how they counted the documents that were moved.
Well, thank you so much. I want to point out that we have books up front. If you would like a copy, Ed will be happy to sign them. And what a great presentation. Thank you for coming. Thank you all for coming.